Have you ever just stopped and wondered why some countries are best friends and others are sworn enemies? It's one of the biggest questions out there, right? This constant push and pull between working together and, well, not. So let's dive into that fundamental puzzle.
To really get to the heart of this, let's start with a little thought experiment. Okay, picture this. A deal's on the table. You are going to gain from it, you'll be better off than you were before. But here's the catch. Your biggest rival? They're going to gain even more. So what do? Do you take the deal, knowing they're getting a bigger piece of the pie, or do you walk away, leaving both of you with nothing? Seriously, your answer to that question puts you smack in the middle of a huge debate in international relations.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to dig into that very dilemma, then we'll look at the two big competing worldviews that try to answer it. After that, we'll see where international institutions fit into all this, and then, and this is the really cool part, we'll unpack a brilliant model that might just tie it all together. And of course, we'll talk about why this isn't just theory, it's shaping our world right now.
So, back to our question. How do we solve this dilemma? Well, for decades, two major theories have been duking it out, offering completely different ways of seeing the world. You can basically think of it as the optimists versus the pessimists.
So on one side, you have the optimists, officially known as Neoliberal Institutionalists. Their whole thing is that states can and should work together for mutual benefit. They're focused on what we call absolute gains. Basically, as long as the pie is getting bigger for everyone, it's a win. Then you have the pessimists, the structural realists. They see the world as this ruthless, constant struggle for power. For them, you can never let a rival get an edge. They are obsessed with relative gains. It's not about how much you win, it's about making sure you win more than the other guy. You can see how different this is, right? One side sees opportunity, the other sees threats everywhere.
Let's just make sure we nail this down because it's absolutely crucial. Absolute gains is simple. The only question you ask is, am I better off than I was before? So if you get $5 and your rival gets 10, hey, you're $5 richer. That's a win. But relative gains asks a totally different question. Am I doing better compared to them? In that same scenario, you're now $5 behind your rival. The gap just got wider. And for a realist, that's a loss. This one little distinction is the whole ballgame.
Okay, so if you're one of the optimists, a neoliberal, how do you actually get countries to focus on those win-win absolute gains? Well, their answer is institutions, big international ones. They believe these organizations are what create the trust and the structure needed for everyone to work together.
So, how do they actually pull this off? Well, for starters, they create the rules of the road, kind of like what the World Trade Organization does for commerce. They give everyone a place to talk instead of fight, like the United Nations. And this one is huge. They act as a referee. Think of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors nuclear deals to make sure nobody is cheating. All of this helps build trust, and it lowers the fear that cooperation is just going to blow up in your face.
You know, the political scientist Stephen Krasner really hit the nail on the head way back in 1982. He said these institutions create the very foundation for cooperation by setting up all the rules and procedures. They make the world more predictable, a place where working together isn't just a nice idea, it becomes the most logical thing to do.
So for years, that was the big debate. Are countries cooperative or competitive, driven by absolute gains or relative gains? The two sides were just kind of stuck, talking past each other. And then a new idea popped up that completely changed the game.
And I mean, the whole field was really at an impasse. It felt like you had to pick a side. Either countries were rational partners looking for a good deal, or they were paranoid rivals locked in a fight for survival. The two worldviews just seemed like they could never, ever be reconciled. But then, in a landmark 1991 paper, a political scientist named Robert Powell offered this absolutely brilliant way out of the deadlock. He basically suggested that maybe, just maybe, everyone had been asking the wrong question the whole time.
Powell's big breakthrough was to shift the whole focus. He argued that it's not about the nature of a country, whether it's good or bad. No, it's all about the constraints they're dealing with in any given situation. For Powell, context is everything.
And what is the single biggest, most important constraint in all of international politics? The cost of war, plain and simple. How expensive, how difficult, and how risky it is to use military force, that one variable changes the entire calculation for a country.
Powell used what's called a game-theoretic model to map out the strategic choices countries face. And what he showed, pretty convincingly, is that the threat of force acts like a giant switch. Depending on whether the cost of fighting is high or low, it completely flips a country's strategy and changes how much it worries about a rival getting ahead.
So here's the crucial point, and it's pretty elegant. When the cost of fighting is extremely high, think two countries with nuclear weapons, a rival getting a little richer isn't an existential threat. It's just too dangerous to fight them anyway. So states act like neoliberals. They cooperate and focus on those absolute gains. But when the cost of fighting is low, a rival's gain could quickly be turned into military power and used against you. That is a direct threat. And so states behave like realists. They get paranoid, they prioritize security, and they become deeply suspicious of cooperation. This is brilliant because it shows how both theories can be right, just under different conditions.
Okay, so that's a fascinating academic idea, but what does it actually mean for the real world? Why should you care? Well, because it explains so much about how countries actually behave every single day. This model helps explain a puzzle we see all the time: why nations act so differently in different areas. In the international economy, the cost of a fight, like a trade war, is high, but it's not usually catastrophic. So countries tend to cooperate and focus on absolute gains, just like neoliberals would predict. But in military matters, where the cost of losing could mean annihilation, states become obsessed with relative gains, behaving like classic realists.
And that right there is the big takeaway. This explains the central paradox of our time, how two countries can be deeply connected economic partners, trading billions of dollars a day, while at the same time being fierce military rivals, spending billions to counter each other. They're just operating with two different rulebooks in two different arenas.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty urgent question for our time. As we face these huge global threats, climate change, pandemics, AI, the cost of not cooperating is incredibly high for everyone. So in that kind of world, will nations focus on the absolute gains of working together to survive? Or will they stay trapped in that old realist mindset, terrified of what their rivals might gain and end up risking it all? The answer to that question will define our future.